Evening. Happy Sunday, everybody. I've got some important news. I got a phone call from the bishop a few weeks back, and he told me that things were going to change a little bit. The first change is that I'm going to be moving away from my parish assignment this summer. Going to be taking over a role as bishop secretary, uh, MC for Master of Ceremonies for the diocese, director of the liturgy office, and vice chancellor. If that vice chancellor thing sounds cool, it really isn't. And so that'll be starting effective June 28th. And the second piece of news, and this one's a little more up in the air, is that I'm supposed to start studying canon law this summer at the Catholic University of America. So I wouldn't really be starting my job until August, although the appointment would become active uh, June 28th. But I have not been accepted into canon law school yet, and I don't have housing arranged yet. So I'm still working on it, and hopefully things will work out. But yeah, not sure. Not sure if that's happening, but I wasn't expecting to move so soon. I was kind of hoping for another year, but this should be a good thing. Congrats on the coming promotion. Yeah, that's what we'll talk about it. Talk about it as a promotion. It's definitely not an opportunity for me to carry the bishop's bags for the next 4 or 5 years. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So you may be wondering, what does the bishop secretary, master of ceremonies, director of the liturgy office, and vice chancellor do? As bishop secretary, I kind of help keep track of his schedule, but I'm not his only secretary. He's got an office secretary that handles a lot of work for him. Uh, but I would help him when he's kind of traveling around with those sorts of things and manage kind of the going around schedule, not the office schedule. Um, Master of Ceremonies is probably the most interesting and fun job. I get to coordinate all of the liturgies with the bishop. Um, so that should be interesting. And with the Newman Center's construction completing here pretty soon, I imagine that's going to mean one of the liturgies I'll be involved with is a dedication of the church, which is quite the prospect, quite the endeavor. Doing a church dedication; those usually take 2.5, 3 hours of rituals you only do every once in a while. Director of the liturgy office means that anytime somebody has questions about liturgy stuff, I have to be the guy with the answers. And if there's any changes coming down the pipeline, like recently, we made a minor modification to the formula of absolution. I'd be the guy handing those things out. And while chancellor sounds like a really important position, and vice chancellor sounds like it's important. In the church law, the main job of the chancellor is just to be the bishop's notary, to make sure that what he's signing is really, in fact, the news of the bishop. And so I'm only going to be doing that job when the main full time chancellor is not around. So there's going to be another priest taking my spot here at Holy Cross, and I'm sure he'll do just fine. He's been a priest for 2 years now, and he's moving on to his second assignment. And the guy whose job I'm taking is getting a small parish in the middle of nowhere, which I'm, knowing him, quite certain that he's quite looking forward to. He did the job I'm taking on well, but he really has a passion for parish ministry. That's where he wants to be, and I think it's going to suit him just fine being out in a parish. So that's what I got going on. This is always an exciting time of year in our diocese, and then probably in most dioceses when these new assignments roll around. And the average rule is that the last Wednesday in June is when all of the new assignments come out. So that's what I've got for news. One of the leads I have for my potential DC housing is the Ukrainian Catholic Seminary there, which could be super interesting. Um, I haven't called them yet. It's been a little interesting doing this application process because it's all kind of last minute. Um, all the places that I've been calling is yeah. Alrighty, what's going on in Catholic world this week? Well, let's take a look. Entire screen. Hello, Laura.
Hello. You sounded like maybe you could use a conversation partner.
I appreciate you hopping on. That was exactly what I was thinking.
Oops.
Are there any
Wait, I
changes at
gotta
your
turn off my
parish
YouTube.
so you don't get the echo?
Yeah, okay, fixed. Yeah, so I was gonna ask you, did you guys do First Communion today, or when do you do it?
We did First Communion last week, and in our diocese, confirmation is done in third grade.
Oh,
So that was the same mass as confirmation and First Communion.
mhm.
So
Okay, in my parish it was today.
did it take over an ordinary mass or was it a special extra mass?
No, it was just at the ordinary mass.
Okay. Yeah, First Communion doesn't take that terribly long. Did they actually
No.
have the kids in a procession or were they just seated down in their place already?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're not having them, um, if you're not having them process in, it's a lot easier.
Yeah. No, it's pretty
Your,
easy.
your
Oh, Go
son would,
Dog Go. You know what? Like I can't top that Go Dog Go analysis from last week. That was amazing.
yeah.
I'm not even wearing a hat. I could have come on wearing a hat. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Then I could have asked you if you liked my hat, and it would have been funny. But yeah,
You know, not every opportunity can be taken.
yeah.
And another fun thing that I got to do this week was a baptism for a friend of mine from high school. A couple
You
friends of mine.
baptized your friend, or you baptized his baby?
They're
Oh,
babies.
okay.
Babies. Yeah. To be clear, these guys have been baptized for years now.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So yeah, and then I was one of their older kids brought How the Grinch Stole Christmas up to me and wanted me to read it. And I
Oh,
put as much character as I could in it, but I think the kids too, and he kind of lost interest. So didn't get to maybe Go Dog Go would have been it, but he was the one who selected it, not me. So I don't
sure.
feel like this is wrong at all. All righty. What is
Oh,
SSPX? It
it's
has
taken over
taken
your algorithm.
over
Uh-oh.
my algorithm.
You go
Uh,
first, Father.
yeah, sure. So the year is 1970, and the man of the hour is Archbishop Lefebvre. He was the former superior general for the Holy Ghost Fathers. Holy Ghost Fathers are a missionary order, mostly French and Irish priests. And they were largely responsible for evangelizing, especially in Africa. The Holy Ghost Fathers have a big presence in Africa. And he was present. Yes, yes. I don't think it has anything to do with our Lefebvre. He was very French. He did not like the direction that the new mass was taking, and his perspective on it was as a missionary. So it's not like this guy was piloting a desk his whole life. He had actually gone and worked out in mission fields in Africa, and he observed the reactions that he got to the traditional Roman rite, and he thought that the beauty of the liturgy, the solemnity, the meaning behind it, that was actually more effective than the new rite that had just been put together and promulgated. And him, being a bit of a missionary, he's used to just going off and doing things without really waiting for permission, because you tend to have a lot of extra authority when you're out in the field, separated from your superiors. So he goes and he founds a priestly society. So what would that mean? That means basically a group of priests with a common mission. He founds a seminary in Switzerland, I think, and begins training priests exclusively in the tradition of the church. All throughout the 1970s, there's this back and forth between him and the Vatican, because he does not going along with the new paradigm, but this Society of St. Pius X is growing in popularity. So through the 1970s and 1980s, there's this continual tension, drama, misunderstanding between the Vatican and Society of St. Pius X. All of this comes to a head in 1988. Archbishop Lefebvre wants to have a bishop ordained to be his successor. And the main reason for this is that he thought it was very important that all of his priests be ordained using the traditional Roman ordination ceremony rather than the modern one. And while he was around, he was able to do it. But he was worried that they weren't going to be able to find bishops who were willing to do it in the old way. So there's this continual back and forth between him and the Vatican, and a little bit of drama on that account of, um, whether or not the Vatican was going to give him what he wanted, and if he had just waited around a little bit longer, would that have all worked out? But as it turns out, I think it was June of 1988, while having a letter in his hand from Pope John Paul II explicitly telling him not to, he goes ahead and he consecrates 4 men to the episcopacy, which meant an automatic excommunication. And, it's not like that was going to catch him by surprise. He knew it was going on ahead of time. And so the Society of St. Pius X has been in a state of canonical irregularity bordering on schism since 1988. They are dedicated to the traditional Roman rite, not the Reformed rite that came about after Vatican II. And there was a splinter group from SSPX, the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, FSSP, lots of S's and P's here, that splintered off from Society of St. Pius X in 1988 and stayed in full communion with Rome. And to this day, they've not had any trouble. Well, maybe not any trouble, but they've been able to have all of their ordinations in the traditional Roman rite while being in the in full communion with Rome. No canonical irregularities or anything like that.
Good job.
So, anything you want to add to that, Laura?
Yeah, one moment. Give me 5 minutes. Okay, so, just regarding the FSSP, when I was in college, we invited a priest to say the Tridentine Mass at our local church. And he was an FSSP priest who had been an SSPX priest. And so we really enjoyed telling people that he was FSSPX, SSPX.
Formerly.
Yeah. FSSP, XSSPX.
This is why people find Catholicism incomprehensible.
Yeah, and we had a fun dinner with him after Mass where our university chaplain, who was also the parish priest, and he was like a very toe the line kind of guy. He was just this really standard, like, whatever my bishop tells me to do, I'm just going to do that. And he didn't complain about things, and he wasn't like super opinionated about what was going on in the church, whatever. And so he was sitting at dinner with this FSSP SSPX priest, and the conversation came around to Bishop Lefebvre. He was a bishop, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And this priest goes, "Oh yeah, Bishop Lefebvre. Wow, I mean, yeah, I knew him. He was a really wonderful man. And our university chaplain goes, yes, it's a shame that he died in schism. And then the dinner continued.
It is a shame. It is a shame. I've got a lot of soft spot in my hearts for the arguments that he was making, the position that he was taking. But I want to answer Phlebas's question here. So technically, he would have no chance of salvation. So this is the now you're going to figure out why I'm going off to study canon law, because what the legal reality of the church is and what the real reality of the church is, they aren't like one to one, right? So an excommunication, what the legal effect of that is that you cannot hold the church office and you cannot receive from the spiritual goods of the church. So you can't receive communion. You need to have the excommunication lifted before confession, all of those sorts of things. So that's what the legal effect of excommunication is. That doesn't actually tell us about the state of his soul.
All right, I'm just going to say bye because something's going on at my house. But it was nice
Okay.
to see you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. I hope that gets to continuing. When I went to go learn the traditional Latin Mass, I went to go learn that at Our Lady of Guadalupe Seminary in Denton, Michigan. That's the priestly fraternity of St. Peter Seminary, and the rector of the seminary there joined the SSPX way back in the 1970s, before it was cool. And he knew Archbishop Lefebvre personally. And his suspicion was that near the end, Archbishop Lefebvre had quietly taken on a position of sede vacatism, where he believed that the person claiming to be the Pope wasn't really the Pope. And that might have accounted for some of his behavior, even though formally the SSPX has never been a sede vacatist position. They've always, and there's some really weird things going on, right? So when the SSPX thinks that a priest needs to be laicized, they will do that through Rome. They'll send the paperwork through Rome, and Rome will process that. So that's why it's not really a schism. It looks kind of an awful lot like a schism. It would be bizarre to allow so many other forms and not the Latin, wouldn't it? Yes, exactly, Phlebas. I've been saying this for a while. Hello, Mark.
Hello. You look lonely. So I figured
thank you.
since Laura couldn't hold down the fort, I would join you.
Yeah, hosting people that takes work. So
It does. Well, and also you're not only talking my namesake, but you're also talking about the Vatican II stuff that is so near and dear to both our hearts, I suspect.
yeah. Good evening, Renee. Good evening. How did your stream go on Friday? I was out with friends in Meat Space.
Oh, well, I thought it went well. We split it up into two pieces, the stream and the after party. So now you don't have to watch 5 hours and just watch the monologue. And
Oh,
the
so that
views
was
are
planned.
terrible on
Okay.
the stream. The views on the stream are awful. I don't know why, but that's okay.
Maybe the weather's nice and people are going outside.
I hope so. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I hope so. And I did a stream with Manuel earlier in the week, and I did a stream with Vander Clay earlier in the week. So a lot of streaming this past week.
Yeah.
Did you see the third wayism that I did with Vander Clay?
I did. I think I watched all of that. I hopped in at the end, didn't I? That was the one I hopped in. Right?
Yeah. You saw the whole thing now, right?
I had to get up to talk to my boss briefly, and that was when Claire was on. So
You didn't miss anything. Oh, there was a lot of suspicion that you left on different for real reasons. And I was like, I don't think so. I bet something just happened.
You realize I'm in a cubicle right now, right? Anything could happen.
Anything could happen. Yeah, they thought you left because of Claire, and I'm like, I doubt it, but maybe.
No, no, if somebody else is there to deal with it, I that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah. It's a strange position to take. So
Yeah.
yeah, I thought there was a lot of insight in that particular stream too, because Vanderclay seemed to go, "Oh, I see what you're saying. I see the difference between crisis of faith and meaning crisis." I'm like, "Good, that's a good start."
I think he
So
watched the video we made.
yeah, yeah, I think he did too. But that's different from actually interacting and getting the point. And it was funny too
Yeah.
because we've been talking about this video for a while, and I was like, well, I have to ping him about it. So I pinged him on Twitter, and I got all this stuff going on. And Manuel wants to do a video, and so it's like busy week. And then he gets back to me immediately and says, "Oh yeah, how about today?" And I was like, I'm going like, I have to write down notes because I'm not sure I can talk about, like, I know about it, but I was figuring like I'd have a couple days, I could kind of mull it out. Nope, nope, it's a few hours. It's to rearrange everything about my day, cancel my stream with Manuel, and put it off to the next day, which was fine with him because he wanted to do the same. So I was like, oh, good, we're on the same page.
Mhm.
So yeah, that stream that I did with Manuel is about AI and Chat GPT and that atrocious video that John did, where I was just like, wow, what a train wreck this is. It's amazing
Yeah.
somebody can get everything wrong. That's remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw this video. I guess Matthew Pajot had shared it. It was in the style of a Metal Gear Solid 2 dialogue
Yes.
between I never played Metal Gear Solid 2, so the guy who's not Solid Snake and his controller talking about how putting all these AI tools out on the internet is actually supposed to just precipitate a crisis where we want to have digital verification of a real human being. And oh man, that got all my conspiratorial neurons firing. It's like, oh dang, that makes so much sense.
Well, the problem is they're perennial patterns that you need. Once you have X, you need Y. And it's like, no,
Mm.
no, we're trying to get around Y. So we're going to put everything in the digital space. But once you have X, you need Y. And then, no, 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 no. We're going to, so, it's this ongoing
So
circle.
so this is a perennial pattern. Can you give
Yeah,
me two former instances of this sort of thing happening?
sure. So in the early days of the country, you didn't need a passport to come and go. Right. And then eventually it's like, oh, no, 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 we have to have one. Because once it reaches a certain size, now all of a sudden you do need to know who belongs here and who doesn't. Right. Or, you know, then you need papers. So you,
Mhm.
you need to walk around with papers, which doesn't mean you couldn't get into the country without papers. That's what WAP means, without papers. It's an immigrant
Mm,
without immigrant papers on them. They didn't
mhm,
throw them out of the country. But the reason why they started to have this immigration green card system in the US was actually because they let a bunch of mostly Italian anarchists in, and anarchists throughout history, by the way. If you read any history at all and you pay any attention at all, anarchists bomb people. That's what they do. They bomb
yeah,
people
yeah.
and they shoot leaders. That's pretty much their whole MO. This is why when people are like, I'm an anarchist, I'm like, well, I hope not, because I'd have to kill you. You would be an enemy of not only the state, but of me, because you bomb innocent people and kill them. And I'm just not a fan. Like,
Okay,
I mean,
so
maybe you
so
are. So
all of the immigration early 20th century, we have immigration, now we need passports.
exactly. Now, well, passports, now we need, identification on the ground, right? Then
Okay.
you get cars, right? So at first, identification is for things like alcohol and voting, right? It's just age verification. But then you get cars. Now you need verification that you are paying taxes on and able to utilize safely the roads, which you didn't have with horse-drawn carriages because you don't need them with horse-drawn carriages because they're so slow that it doesn't
And
matter.
the horses have a sophisticated AI.
Again, that's the thing. Like a horse is a sophisticated AI. It does the same thing as an AI. People do not understand this. It's like you're telling me you're creating an intelligence. Did you see what happened the last time we put an intelligence to use in a way that we could control, like with horses or cows or chicken? Like we've done this before, and the pattern always plays out exactly the same way.
Mhm.
It's the same pattern. Once you introduce that, you need all these other things that you've been trying to get away from. And it's not right away because scale matters. So when it's 10% of the population, who cares? But when it's 30% of the population, now it becomes an issue. Or when there's an outsized effect, like drunken driving isn't really a big deal until a lot of people start dying because more people have cars. And now all of a sudden you have to pass a law against drunk driving. And like there were, for the most part, no laws against drunken horse-drawn carriages and drunken riding your horse. Drunken riding your horse never killed anybody, so nobody cared. You might
Never
kill
killed
yourself.
anybody else. Somebody might have fallen off.
Right.
Yeah.
But nobody is like, well, yeah, that's your choice. But when it's no longer your choice, now you need laws to deal with that. And some of that is velocity, like actual velocity of technology adoption or the velocity of the technology, right? Like
Yes.
internet porn's not a problem in the beginning because transferring images over a modem is too slow. And so it's like it's not a thing because it can't be a thing. But then once the speed happens, right? Once the velocity picks up, now all of a sudden you need to do something about it. Of course, we didn't, and now we have a big problem we need to do something about. But yeah, it's the same perennial pattern.
Yeah. Apparently, lots of people back in the day died from carriages and horses. So anyway, I don't know. I haven't studied carriages and horses. Don't ask me. I hope William Branch isn't pulling our leg. Hello, John.
Whoa!
How
Congrats.
you doing?
I think
Well, thank you.
that feels
I
like promotion. I don't know, but
what is it? It's a lot of responsibility, and especially with the master of ceremonies position, it's a lot of visible responsibility. So if let's say if an ordination or a chrism mass is an absolute disaster and nothing's going right, that'll be my fault.
ouch.
Yeah. So anyway, and I got to go back to school. I was pretty well expecting the school thing to happen. The bishop's secretary, master of ceremonies thing was like, oh, that's happening too. Alrighty. I thought I might go back. They've been talking about the canon law thing for years now. That's what I get for showing interest and aptitude. I get extra schooling.
Go to
I'm such
school.
an idiot sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to get out of school as soon as I could.
Oh, that first fall where I didn't have to pack up all my stuff and go someplace and sit in a classroom, that was great. It
Yeah.
was just the best.
Yeah.
I just got to watch the kids go back to school and I just continued doing my thing. Yeah.
So I have a question.
Sure.
I need an answer from you on this question. I think it's kind of interesting. So let's say Peter is sort of the archetypal pope, priest. I mean, of course, in the ultimate sense, Christ is our archetypal priest. Of the Hebrews, all of that, right? So, but in the same sense, Peter is like the typological pope, right? Is that fair assessment? Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
So
yeah, basically, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then, what's interesting about this is one part of being pope or even a priest or whatever is not being married, and that's the negative take on it. The positive take is this is your vocation to minister to the flock in a special way that a married person couldn't do, right? So that's the positive take on it.
Mm-hmm.
What I find interesting is that Peter was married,
Mm-hmm.
and yet the pope and the priests are not supposed to be married. So I'm curious your take on that discrepancy.
Yeah. So, what do you know about Peter's wife?
Well, that he had one. That's about it.
Yeah, that's it. That's literally everything. So
Yep.
we don't know if
Yep.
she was around. We don't know. I mean, we can imagine Peter. He had a mother-in-law, right? That's the only reference we know that he had a wife is that Peter's mother-in-law is mentioned in Scripture. So all of a sudden, he starts tramping around with this itinerant preacher. Like apparently, the wife was okay with that. or maybe the wife had passed away. And so anyway, there's like a thousand arguments you could make about it, and they're all from silence, because there isn't even a consistent tradition in the church. Because you'll hear, one tradition say that Peter's wife had died, another tradition say that she went out and preached the gospel with him, another tradition say that she went and lived in seclusion or something. You'd have to really start reading it. So, but the fact is that the tradition of clerical celibacy was not stronger anywhere else besides Rome and the Western influence of the church there, and the Roman clergy in the city of Rome. They had a very strong tradition of celibacy. It's not like they never had any married clergy, but it was sort of, and it was always understood to be an apostolic tradition, that this was something handed down from the apostles. So we just look at that. We say that whatever the fate of Peter's wife, didn't preclude the Roman Church from developing this tradition of celibacy. Imagine he ended up with a mother-in-law and a wife.
Yeah, I feel worse from after that.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I guess, yeah. I mean, I guess it is an argument for silence. Like we could speculate. The Catholics would speculate one way, Protestants would speculate one way, sort of using it both ways, of course. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just an interesting detail. Like we don't have evidence that any of the other apostles were married or not. I mean, you would expect that in that sort of, in the Jewish culture and around the time of Christ, they would get married very quickly, generally, right? And they would, get married quickly and start having children quickly. So
I think the daughters would. I think the sons had to go out and establish themselves a little bit more before they would get wives.
Okay,
That's and that's we've heard this from Jordan Peterson, right? Very consistently across cultures. It's like slightly younger women with slightly older men and up a status class, or across, So,
Yeah.
so if they were all rather young,
Right.
and had attached themselves to this wandering rabbi, then it's not all that crazy to think that only Simon was married. So, but again, it's like the Gospels don't tell us, and there isn't a consistent. I mean, the consistent tradition is that they weren't married. So depends on what you think about tradition. So
So the tradition is that he had a mother-in-law, but he wasn't married.
I mean, besides, okay, so it's obvious Simon at least at some point was married, right?
Right. Yeah.
But all the other ones, the tradition is that they had never been married.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. All right. Interesting.
Yeah, that's
Because, like, I guess the you mentioned like how it was sort of a strong tradition just within Rome. So, what do you think is the step that you get from this is a tradition that we haven't imposed by strict law? This is just the traditional pattern that most of the clergy have been celibate. Then how do you get from that to whenever it was 1000 AD? I can't remember when it was.
the Lateran Council, Gregory the Seventh, all of that.
Yeah.
So this is what I was taught, and I haven't gone in and studied it myself, but that in the Western part of the church, the celibacy thing was becoming more and more common as time was going on. The married priests thing was sort of like still happening at the edges of, we'll say, ecclesial life. You had small town pastors, they had wives. And what the Gregorian reforms were doing was universalizing an already common practice rather than introducing something novel.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's that's the argument that I was given. I haven't studied it myself, so
I mean, I don't mean to impose it as a deal breaker by any stretch, because it's like the tiniest of details in the whole scope of this larger story, right?
mhm.
I just find it interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I just thought the connection was kind of interesting. Why, you know, I feel like some Catholic somewhere has wrote about this in quite a bit of depth, because
Mhm.
you know, one thing that the church does have is very extensive thoughts and answers to all of these sorts of questions, right? So
Mhm,
I
mhm.
just thought I'd pick your brain about it, but
Well, you've about picked me to the end. I don't have anything more to give at this point.
maybe they'll tell you something, and when you're learning canon law, maybe there'll be something in there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think canon law is going to be a lot of canon law.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to have to get my Latin polished up too. I can pronounce it okay, but understanding it's harder.
Yeah.
Latin's easy. It's like a computer language. It's in fact, they should have made it a computer language. It's so regular, it's unbelievable.
A lot more regular than Greek was. I'm glad I don't have to do canon law in Greek. The verbs are awful.
Hmm.
The verbs are just awful in Greek.
Yeah. True.
Do you do both TLM and what is it? Novus Ordo? You do
Yeah,
both?
yeah. So my bread and butter is the modern Roman Rite, the Novus Ordo. That's what I do almost every day. Um, I don't often have an opportunity to celebrate the traditional Latin Mass with the people. Although my predecessor in my new job, he would regularly do it on Sundays for the traditional Latin Mass community that meets at our high school chapel. So that'll probably be something I get to do more of. Get to have more opportunities to sell it. So that's fine. Pope Gregory the Seventh reforms dealt with excessive independence of the clergy and lack of moral integrity by the clergy. Yeah, that lack of moral integrity thing is a perennial pattern.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a people problem, I think. If we can
Yeah.
just get the people to stop peopling, it'd be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, it's only the fact that it has implications for the structure of the Catholic Church more so than it does in like Protestantism that it gets so much attention, right? I mean,
Yeah, I don't know. I think the Orthodox, and Father Stephen will have to hop on here and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Orthodox still won't have married bishops.
Hmm.
And it's,
Really?
I think,
Huh.
I'm not gonna dive like all in on that opinion there, which means that because so many of their clergy are married, you know, when guys are in the seminary. Um, so again, I'm talking about the Orthodox here, which I don't fully understand how it actually works, but I'm pretty sure you have to be married before you're ordained. That's kind of the rule.
I think you're right on that. Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yeah.
And so guys will be real anxious to find a wife because they know that if they're a married priest, they'll have no chance of becoming or very low chance of becoming a bishop. So it kind of protects them, puts a glass ceiling over them, and then they don't have to worry about it anymore. Which, like,
Good system.
dealing with seminary, I'm glad I didn't have to deal with women as well. One at a time.
Yeah.
Spouse of a minister can be say negative. Yeah, it solves some problems and creates new ones.
Yep.
Trade-offs.
Yeah.
Trade-offs.
Trade-offs.
Mark's got a great video on trade-offs on the top quality channel, Navigating Patterns.
Can confirm. That is true. Top channel, top video for sure.
Well, this is why, like, I don't know how it looks in Catholic churches, but in a lot of Protestant churches that call themselves complementarians, the women run the church, right? It's kind of an ironic fact. So, the fact about the pastor's wife having more influence than the pastor,
Yeah. I mean, they show up, the ladies volunteer, they do a lot of good work, and everything would grind to a halt without them. And that is another one of those perennial patterns.
Right.
across all churches everywhere. So
Women point. You're
Yeah.
not getting around the fact that women point. Og can build and Og can smash all day long, randomly, but women point, and that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
women think it's very important that we have sandwiches and bars at every funeral. And they're right. Because if I was running this, we wouldn't have sandwiches and bars. I'd be like, what? The funeral's done. Go home.
Yeah.
Oh,
I was reading this. This was a while ago now, but what's his name? Leon Pottles, something like that. He's a
okay.
Catholic writer or something. What's the name of the book now? He was writing about what he sees as the feminization of the church, going back, I think, to the Middle Ages, is where he sort of starts a thing, and sort of watching this progress.
The church impotent.
The church impotent, yes, that's what it is. So it's been a while since I've read it, so I might butcher it, but his argument is this sort of certain theology or practices that worked his way into the church in the Middle Ages. He quotes a few particular.
Yeah, he's probably not a Bernard of Clairvaux fan, is he?
Yeah, I think that's one of his targets.
Yeah,
but-
well, I think so. I mean, Bernard of Clairvaux, his kind of innovation, we'll say, is that he began reading the Song of Songs on an individual level, right? Because all of the fathers of the church had very consistently, they had understood that on a communal level, right? So Christ was wedded to his church as a whole, and Bernard of Clairvaux began applying that to the individual. So Christ is marrying you. Now, I think that if you keep what Bernard of Clairvaux was saying in the context that he was saying it to a bunch of monks, then it works out just fine, because like they're monks, and they're gonna have the right, in theory, they're gonna have the right sort of maturity to be able to handle that without getting all weird about it.
That's interesting, because
But once you start trying to tell that to Joe Sixpack, he's gonna be like, "What the heck? You mean I'm married to Christ now?"
right,
It's like,
right.
like he doesn't need that.
Well, that's interesting, because the sort of the dominant interpretation, and I wonder if this is in a reaction of this, but the interpretation I grew up with in my non-denom charismatic church was that this the Song of Songs is strictly about Christ and the church, and there's no you can't there's because we're kind of they wouldn't say this, but because we're kind of a little bit Puritan, we can't say that it's about some sort of erotic love poetry, right? So I just wonder where that interpretation came from, because it's so the charisma, that interpretation I grew up with, because it's so obviously lacking to me. Like, it's not wrong, because Christ in the church is the archetype of male-female marriage, but it's not just that, right? So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The framing is really tricky. When people say the feminization of something, masculine and feminine are inevitable reality. You're not getting around them, right? I think what they're really referring to, and I do hope this book comes out, it's called The Hidden Matriarchy. I think what they're referring to is when you unhide the matriarchy, right? When the divine feminine, there's too much light shown upon it, that creates all sorts of problems, right?
Yeah.
And then you get these issues where people are trying to follow something maybe they shouldn't, right? People are trying to make something explicit that is supposed to be implicit, because pointing doesn't work quite so well. If it's explicit, it's pointing in particular is better implicitly, where you're not saying you need to be nicer to that person, but instead you're saying, niceness is a virtue. And it's just sort of, like, oh, I wasn't nice to that person, right? It's a subtle difference, but it's huge in terms of how well it moves people, right? And it's a difference, because this has come up a few times over the past week, right? It's the difference between trying to being in a public discussion with somebody and trying to prove a point to the person you're talking to, and not caring about whether or not you convince that one person, but instead trying to make a point to the audience. So now it's not about like making sure that one person understands your point, but it's like, no, the audience should see something important. And I can use this person who maybe I can't convince them as contrast to show something, right? That's an implicit way of doing things rather than explicit way of doing things where I'm trying to say convert you in the moment or something. And hello, Ted. It's good to see you, sir.
Hey, Mark.
Matt Fradd versus Dennis Prager, right? That
Yes.
conversation wasn't for Dennis Prager's benefit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, clearly Prager was not going to move on his position because, well, we know where his shadow is now for sure. And it wasn't important. The important part was the fact that people like Ethan clipped it and threw it on my Discord channel because it's like, here's the contrast. You can see plainly what's wrong with Prager, and you can see plainly where you want to be, you know, in that spectrum, because it is a spectrum, to be fair, right? It's not a yes or no thing.
Is that Ponce of Aquinas?
Yeah. He had Dennis Prager on, and they talked about that whole porn thing.
He doubled down on his ridiculous and obviously incorrect and stupid position. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like hearing him talk about it. It's like he still thinks it's magazines. I think
You have
And
to.
it's
Well, you
just
have to
a-
know. You have to know a little. You have to know more about Prager. So he's got a particular trick that works particularly well to help marriages. And once you understand that, and then you add this, it's like, oh, I can clearly see his psyche and his ethos around that one particular issue, and that makes it all more clear.
Well, this is why PVK calls him a cold warrior, right? He's totally out in that mold in every way. And like what I think he's mixing up, I haven't watched the Matt Fradd thing or like any criticism of Prager's statements. But my guess is the way that we should criticize him is to say you're mixing up something like essential nature and accidental nature as a result of the fall, right? You know, like, oh, men are just programmed to, you know, look for boobs. Oh, okay. Maybe there's something not quite right about that, Dennis. I don't know. You think that's a good thing? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I don't know. All that talks about essence and accidents made you really sound Catholic, John.
Well, okay, so I was like, you know, I'm on with Father Eric. This is something that at least I'm gonna like. Probably, if you would ask me what I think those things mean, I couldn't tell you. But
Well, you use them correctly. You've got at least like a 5th grade understanding of the words or something.
yeah. Well, it's helpful because like people struggle with the incarnation, right? Like, how is it that Yahweh, the Most High God, comes in and incarnates in a specific time and place, right? And so it's sort of a neat way of sort of, yeah, these accidental properties. He's a first century Aramaic speaking, you know, Jew, but, you know, essential properties, whatever, right? So
Yeah.
I do like those sort of distinctions. It sort of neatly wraps things up. So
Well, that's the
Gives you
best.
good-
I like the word you used, right? Because that is the problem, right? You struggle with, yes. And you know what? That's correct. And if you're not struggling with it, you're wrong. And
Yes.
we're always like, oh, I want an answer. But if you get an answer, you're not struggling with it. But the right answer is to struggle with it. That's the correct, that's the true way to have the relationship, to have the engagement, is to struggle with it. And so I like that you used that word. That was very good.
we who wrestle with God, yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, just thinking about reading G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy for the first time, and this is in no ways original to him, but his distinction between like the solar mystery and the lunar mystery, if you will. Like, he's like, the moon, you can look at it, you can see, there it is, and like, it doesn't illuminate anything. He's like, the sun, if you look at it, you'll go blind, but it illuminates your whole world. He's like, thus are the Christian mysteries, particularly the Trinity and the Incarnation. He's like, you're not going to like look into it and get it, or, you know, comprehend it, get around it, any of that, but like, it'll light up the entire universe for you if you let it. And so it's that process of continually like working over it in your mind, in liturgy, in prayer, in conversation and all of these things, that it's going to then like unfold all this truth for you. And yeah, I mean there's two meanings of mystery, like mystery, the mystery of the Trinity, versus mystery like an Agatha Christie mystery, where it's like you get your facts in order and then boom, there it is. And it's like those aren't the same thing. Which, Mark, it kind of reminds me of you talking about problems, right? Agatha Christie's mystery is a problem in the sense of
Yes.
a thing that has a solution. The Trinity is a mystery, not in the sense that it has a solution that if you just look at it long enough, you'll see the solution. It's like, no, this is something that is infinite in its meaning, and so the possibility of encompassing all of that into something that's no longer a possibility. And in that sense, it's a mystery.
Well, and there's this idea, Ted, I don't know if you've heard this theory before, this thesis, but that, what ruined culture, roughly speaking, is Sherlock Holmes. And because the mystery genre is a set of problems that's resolvable if you're just smart enough or detailed enough or attentive enough. It used to be attentive enough. So if you look at Sherlock Holmes, his whole trick is attention, right? Because all the knowledge in the world, without paying attention to the details of which side of your beard is darker, doesn't get you the answer. And so it's clearly not a knowledge play, right? Which is not to say knowledge isn't important.
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes has a lot of knowledge, and he develops his own knowledge and does his own experiments. But it's all detail. It's attention first, and we've missed that. But that's the ruining of the world, is the idea that you could pay attention to enough details and have enough knowledge that things that are unknowable previously or unknowable to everybody but Sherlock Holmes could become knowable.
So, Mark, I don't know if you remember, there's that particular scene in Sherlock Holmes where Watson finds out that Sherlock doesn't know about the heliocentric view of the universe, of the solar system.
Yes.
He's like, and Holmes is like, great, I'm going to forget that as quickly as I can. Why? Because it's not important to solving mysteries. He's like, it doesn't matter.
Help.
And so the point of it, it's not knowledge. He's like, you've just given me total extraneous knowledge, right?
Yep.
That has to do with this sort of like cosmic thing. He's like, I don't care about that. What I care about is, do I have the tool set necessary in order to solve the mystery? So I'm going to lay all that aside. But I am interested in trying to be able to deduce what's his example? The ocean from a single drop of water. It's like,
yes.
That's
what we've missed, is that the lesson is right there, that certain types of knowledge are important. So what is the dust up with Galileo and the church anyway? The dust up is around which math you use to do astrological calculations. Period. Full stop. End of argument. And people don't know this, but if you actually read the original material, that's what it's about. It turns out that when you take the heliocentric view of the solar system, a bunch of math becomes easier and more accessible, right? So you're destroying a priestly class, not the priestly class, but in previous times, that was the priestly class. So if you go back to, ancient Babylon or Sumer or whatever, and the priests were the ones who did the astrology. And, back then they did have trigonometry. As it turns out, we've only learned that in the past 5-6 years. They did have trigonometry. They could do all those calculations. They're different in Egypt the same way, right? So, but that whole thing collapses if you make it easy, and then everybody can do it because now it's more accessible. So the church also doesn't want that to happen because they're into hierarchy for some odd reason. They're all about this crazy hierarchy thing, and so that's really the argument isn't you shouldn't know this or you shouldn't do this. It's you shouldn't teach this. Right? You shouldn't tell people about this. You shouldn't write books about this. It's not like you know this and you're a witch and now we're going to burn you. That's the classical interpretation. This is where the crazy modern scientists get this idea that it's a battle between science and religion and education. That's nonsense. That's all nonsense.
Galileo didn't do himself any favors. He was not cooperating well.
Well, Mark, to what you said, like the narrow definition of heresy is teaching falsehood, teaching incorrect doctrine or practices or whatever. So, you could, if do you think Galileo was still in that sense a heretic and against the church?
That's not clear. from the stuff that I've read, and I'm not claiming to be super well read, but like I did go and look at some of the original materials and go, oh, well, this isn't this stuff that people normally think about. This is clearly not in the texts. It's just made up. It is actual fantasy, which, fine, fair enough. And some of it is fantasy through over reduction, or wanting to simplify it so that people could understand that there was a battle, right? But at the end of the day, like, what happened to him? Oh, he was locked in his private home, paid for by the church, by the way, and fed well, and had servants. Can you do that to me, please, as punishment? Father Eric, what do I have to do to the Catholic Church to get my punishment to be in a beautiful place, near the heart of the church with servants? How can I do that? Because I will do that right now. Whatever
All right,
it
get
is,
going on the time machine, Mark. We'll make it happen.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, but Mark, I mean, to go back where I kind of jumped in this whole discussion of the feminine, right? So thinking about Sherlock Holmes in terms of, because again, this is my reading of Pageau's whole discussion on the feminine, is that frame, that way that you evaluate which facts should be in your attention, that's the feminine. That's like it's the neck that points where the eyes are, where the head's looking, right? So it's
point.
like,
yes.
Yes. And so you're like,
Yes.
look this way. And Sherlock Holmes is saying, I'm not going to look there. I'm going to look here. I'm going to look here. I'm not going to look at this. It's all here. And it's that same sort of in terms of like strata of thinking, right? It's like there's, again, like Pageau, Vervaeke, and Peterson. I think they're trying to articulate it in different ways: relevance, realization, the problem of complexity, and attention. It's the same thing over and over and over.
Same thing. Yep.
How are we going to gather the selection of facts that we're going to pay attention to? Which is, I mean, honestly, that's sort of what postmodernism was doing too, except that it seems like the postmodern move was essentially, hey, look, we realize that there's like a lot of different ways that you can look at this, so none of them are valid. And it's like, okay, hold on.
That's also, Ted, that's also Neoplatonism. It's the undefined part of Neoplatonism, which is what is a whole. Like, which set of parts defines a whole, and what whole does it define? And it's like,
Sure.
Well, Neoplatonism doesn't actually resolve any of that. It just says that can be done. It's like, well, that's helpful,
yeah.
Except it's not.
Well, isn't that Vervaeke's whole point, that it ends up just like basically manifest, like finding a body in Judaism and Christianity and Buddhism and Islam and so on, because like it ends up being more of like a methodology almost. I don't know if I buy this at all, but this is what I'm hearing from him. That's like, it's a methodology in the sense that it can't be believed outside of something to believe.
Well, right, because he spends all his time saying we can't go back, we can't go back, we can't go back. By the way, Neoplatonism, and it all went wrong in Christianity. And if we just go back to Neoplatonism and change it, it'll be fine. But we can't go back. And then when that fails, because it did, like I'm just telling you right now, it failed, right? John's project specifically, he goes back to Socrates, which is before Plato. And so he goes back further and tries to resurrect that. But the bottom line is the problem of relevance realization, which is his great work for sure, like no question about it, is the same. And I think I said this on my stream on Friday, is the same as the problem of attention. You're actually talking about the same thing. What do you pay attention to call a whole? It is, can that be arbitrary? Like, can you just grab things, like I've got an M&M and I've got a root beer bottle, right? A glass root beer bottle. Can I just grab like root beer and cross it with M&M and call it a 1? Because in Neoplatonism, nothing prevents you from doing that. Now, they wouldn't have done that because they were all religious, and like everybody just lies about Greek philosophy. It was all embedded in religion. So they knew from religion, because religion is the art of telos, roughly speaking, right? It's the final cause. They knew what a valid 1 or whole was and what wasn't valid. So in some ways, you invoke Neoplatonism to resurrect postmodern philosophy by saying, no, the postmoderns are actually it's a long tradition all the way back to Neoplatonism. But again, you're stripping out, like Menea was very important to Plato. And it's more important than rationality. Did you ever hear John mention that? Did you ever hear anybody mention that? Almost nobody ever talks about that stuff.
Well, so this is what's interesting about Peugeot is that I feel like even though he and Vervaeke can get in the same room and talk about this for hours, at the end of the day, like he's saying the fundamentally opposite thing. Not only is he saying, look, there's lots of ways that people have found to talk about holes, and you really can't use that, but like it's a deeper level than this. And like he's a philosophical realist. He's like, the holes are actually there. You don't get to pick which ones they are. This is his symbolism happens thing. That's like a fun, like people are accustomed to movies with symbols in them, and that's kind of the language they traffic in. It's like no, you don't get to get away from those things. And honestly, like that was one of the things that I was going to that ended up taking me from Protestantism to traditional Catholicism, which was like, I don't get to decide what those things are. I don't get to say like what the structure of worship is. That's not an arbitrary thing. That's a thing in the same way that, you know, a root beer bottle and saying, you know, looking at that and saying it's not a collection of atoms that I arbitrarily describe as a bottle. It's like, no, it really is a bottle. And like the material of that, and here we go, Father Eric, here's our hylomorphism, right? The material in it is apprehensible, interactable, all of these things, because it has the form of a bottle. Like it's not the material, it's the material in the form, and realizing that, hey, that works all the way up and down.
Unity.
Like, right, but
unity.
Yeah, what's the
is
difference
forgotten
between Peugeot and
transcendental.
Vervaeke? Yeah, Peugeot starts from emanation, and emanation is constraint. And when you start from, and then what the mistake they make in the argumentation is, Vervaeke will say, oh yeah, sure, there's emanation. And then he moves into, but let me tell you about emergence. And there's a 20-minute speech on emergence. It's like, wait a minute, whoa, let's give that kind of time to your idea of emanation, because he doesn't have an idea.
Yeah,
Because
I
it's
noticed
all
that
about
on
the
his AI video. I noticed that for the first time because I heard you said that. I'm like, okay, I'll keep that. And then he did exactly that. It was frightening for you to describe it so well. But unity is the forgotten transcendental. You know, it's like beauty and truth. They get all of the attention, but unity is that transcendental property of being. Because you can only have an intelligible thought, you can only have a knowledge of something insofar as it's actually one thing.
Yes.
Right? And people get into all sorts of trouble when they start treating aggregates as if they're a proper unity, right? So that's why on this channel we have the
I couldn't agree more. But it's ironic
because it's an aggregate. It's an aggregate. It's not an actual unity.
It's not an actual unity. Right. But it's ironic in some sense that these are the people that talk about capital T truth and truth as a noun, as though it's some solid thing. But then when it comes time to admit that there are, we'll say, onenesses or wholes that are valid and useful, and there are those that are not, they're like, no. And then they go back to the appeal to capital T truth, and then that's science. And they just happen to be scientists by sheer coincidence. I'm sure it's a coincidence. It's got to be a coincidence, right? And so they're the priestly class. That's all they're really saying at the end of the day.
Okay. So hold on, Father. I'm getting this thought. Okay, I'm only vaguely familiar with St. Thomas Aquinas' proofs for the existence of God, but it seems to me that there's a relation between this whole idea of contingent being and the fact that you have to go up. You have to work your way down to have those unities to think about. Am I making that up? I feel like I'm like, okay, right. Why is that you can't get to unity in everyday things if it's all immanence? Well, because unity is working its way down through the order of contingent being, right? It's like if everything's contingent, how is there anything that exists as a thing, as a book, as a cup, as a person, as a soul, as an angel, as a cloud? Am I totally crossing wires there?
I don't know why you're bringing in necessity and contingency for that, but I think what you're saying is correct. So like, yeah.
Maybe I'll think about it for a month and get back to you on it.
yeah. A little bit of contemplation while you're out. You're probably done seeding, right? I don't know. Do you do any big agriculture?
No, I do.
Your little farm?
No, we do homestead stuff. And then actually for the last while, I've basically just been doing heavy equipment operation, which I love. And so but I will contemplate it while I'm moving thousands of pounds of dirt around with my gigantic proprioceptive mechanical hydraulic arm. By the way, if anyone tells you that we don't live in a world of giant exoskeleton robots moving around the landscape, they're wrong. They just don't spend enough time with blue collar people.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just a
We've
bunch
got
of
those
for a
giant
while.
exoskeletons right out there
Yeah.
where the church is being built.
Watch someone who knows how to sling dirt around with a 40,000 pound excavator, and they're doing it within like 1 inch accuracy, and you're like, take that, like Japanese mech anime genre. Like, we got you already. Come to the
We're
corn
using
belt.
it for building, not destruction. It's way better.
Any rate, yeah.
I feel like we need to get Peugeot and Vervaeke in a room to talk AI. They just need to have a discussion about this.
Nah.
I think Vervaeke is still receptive to criticism to an extent. So I think I feel like Peugeot could just do it because Peugeot understands the emanation stuff, as you were saying, and you know what Vervaeke, what's strange to me about Vervaeke is that he gives so much. He gives a lot of lip service to theology, at least in his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. He was talking about these theologians, and he's probably read a ton more theology than I have, and good for him. But he did no effort to integrate the Queen of the Sciences, into his cognitive science argument about AI, and it was just aggravating because I'm listening to this, and I'm like, look, AI has no. Let me see if I can stick with the accidental essential language here. AI has no essence of it whatsoever, right? We have the essence of the nature of God. AI is just this. It's this technological Babel golden calf monstrosity, right? It doesn't even have any constituent parts that would make it a whole because there's nothing essential there, right?
You can program it to do
Maybe.
tons of different things, right? Like
Right.
you can program it to fix people's grammar. That's great.
Right.
You can program it to deceive people to thinking that the Pope was wearing a fluffy jacket around. Kind of funny. And then you can program it to do all sorts of evil. Very, very
Yes.
bad.
Yes. Well, it's not the. What was I going to say? The thing about it is that's why it's an idol, and you talk about it as a program. So its entire definition is based around functions and functionality because it implements algorithms or programs, and you see this if all of the sort of different fields of AI, the names of the subfields of AI realize this, or it makes it evident. Like we have computer vision, computers are going to see, there's all stuff going on with that. Natural language processing, that is a doozy if you pick it apart, right? Large language models, right? And we're wrapping all of these it's the scientific, encapsulation and monarchical view trying to, wrap up all of these human conceptions. And it's just, I say this as a person who works in AI, it's not going to work on it's fundamental to the structure of the universe that this stuff will not work as any of these people predict it will. It's ontologically impossible.
Yeah, and they're missing the fact that effectively with the project of AI is not only wrapped up in, we'll say, parasitically stealing the information that it uses from others, but also in improper categorization. And so, for example, right, and this just happened, I think this year, right, one of the big evangelists for self-driving cars, 10 years after he said we're less than 5 years away from fully autonomous self-driving cars, admitted, right when I said that, we hit a wall and we haven't made any progress. And a self-driving car cannot take a left-hand turn after 10 years of research. Now, everybody except people like me and maybe you, John, realize exactly why a left-hand turn is infinitely more problematic than a right-hand turn. Like, we just already know what the problems are, right? And nobody else, left and right, they're equal. One's this way, they're not in driving, and there's lots of little reasons for that. So they pick this stuff. You pick up the category of left and right as being equal, and you try to solve them as problems of equality, of equal complexity. You've already used a definition, a wholeness that's incorrect, because in driving there's no equivalence between a right-hand turn and a left-hand turn. Like, there's no situation on a two-way highway that a right on a left-hand turn on red is viable. But there are situations where a right-hand turn on red is viable, and you can't, like, that alone, and that's only one of the small problems with the difference between left and right-hand turns. So you put them in the same category, but they're not the same problem, and they're not the same complexity of problem. But because Neoplatonism, you just kind of picked a binary, which happens to be a false dichotomy, and said, no, these two things are equal. You can take a right, you can take a left, they're equal. They're not even close to equal. So that just kind of exemplifies the problem of AI, is that the categories that you pick actually really matter. And if you don't pick the right categories in computers, you're completely screwed. You will never fix that problem, ever.
Right. And you're talking about this decision tree that is so large that it blows up into such a computational complex level. Why am I blanking on the
combinatorial explosion?
Yes, and that combinatorial explosion is, I think that is the most insightful thing that Vervaeke has helped me understand about AI, because I've been, I go to school and I read these papers about these algorithms that are trying to the self-driving car thing. They're trying to derain or defog images, or they're trying to do all this sort of stuff. And the combinatorial explosion gets in is, okay, so you see somebody, you see a person walking in the sidewalk. Okay, so person, slow down, but now you have to make all these split-second decisions. Oh, wait, is this person facing you? So it's more likely that they'll see you and get out of the way. Is this person facing away? Do they have headphones in? Do they have a child with them? On and on and on and on. And that's why, and because every single one of those decisions has such a immediate moral dimension to it, that it's the morality thing that they're never going to get right? Because these, you can't, I don't know
the girl.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's not like you can't program morality in it, because ChatGPT has a sense of morality that's based on the biases of its programmers, of course. But it's not adaptable. It doesn't learn, and it doesn't think in those sort of split-second decisions that are necessary for it. And that is something I wish Vervaeke would get more to that, this sort of psychological insights, because that was very helpful for me. His most recent video on it was just like, dude, you got to get some theology in here.
Well, or some realization. I mean, the problem with that AI video, and I'm thinking about doing a treaty on it because it's so full of contradictions, is that he's not getting his own point, and he's contradicting things he says earlier. Like, at one point he says, we've solved the silo problem, which is an absolute bald-faced incorrect statement. And then he describes the silo problem. And I'm like, dude, you literally just described the silo problem. You said it didn't exist. And then in your description of where it falls short, and the worst part is, his example is, I think, at least one other person and he, asked ChatGPT to summarize his work, and it came up with a fourth grader's interpretation or something, I think is what he said. Right. And then he said, but I bet a high-end lawyer wouldn't make that mistake. And I was like, oh, I bet they would, because how many high-end lawyers know as much psychology, cognitive science, philosophy, and history as you do to summarize your work well enough to not make that mistake? Because I bet the answer is almost none. Right. I bet almost no lawyers could do a better job of summary of John's work, because there's, especially not if they're high-end, because they're specialized for lawyers.
Yeah, and that's, I feel like, I spent 50 hours watching Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. I haven't watched his Socrates stuff. I don't know. I just have too much stuff to watch, but
Garbage.
I feel like
Not missing anything.
I great. Okay. I feel like I still had trouble understanding him in the end of it. Like the way that I understood him the most was with PVK as a filter or Peugeot as a filter. When they would talk to each other, that would bring out stuff in Vervaeke. Even Peterson with his sort of manic ways when he talks about
they drag them down, right?
Yeah.
So like so the most amazing thing you could ever possibly hope to watch on the internet is Peugeot, Vervaeke, and Jordan Hall, because Peugeot somehow manages to get Jordan Hall not to talk almost at all. And it's like, well, that's amazing, because you watch Jordan Hall and Vervaeke talk, and they're talking way up here. I mean, it just floats right up immediately, and you can't even follow what they're saying. And I'm not even saying they're wrong necessarily, but some of the stuff is like, well, that's not useful. You know, like telling me, for example, that, well, if you want world peace, we all just have to love each other. Okay, but what does that mean? Like, how would I do that? And the fact is, I'm going to do that differently from Father Eric, who's going to do that differently from Ted, who's going to do that differently from you, who's going to do that differently from PVK, who's right, and it's on and on and on. And so, while what you've said is, quote, true, it's not usefully true because it can't be implemented, right? It's too vague, it's too abstract to actually be helpful. But Peugeot manages to basically bring John down so that he's talking more, closer to the level of people and persons, right? And Jordan Hall is incapable of that, basically. So he almost doesn't speak through the whole conversation. It's a miracle whenever you see somebody actually take a sorcerer like Jordan Hall and silence him so that he's not enchanting you with words anymore.
Okay, I want to go back to AI because I want to throw out an alternative AI hypothesis, and we'll call this the head. So, have any of you guys read C.S. Lewis's Ransom trilogy, ending with That Hideous Strength? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I hear this stuff from AI researchers on particularly like large neural networks and like the LLMs and the image, like all the image generation networks that we got out of the sort of adversarial, all the GAN research that sort of eventually ended up in like Midjourney 5 and whatever nonsense we're in now. And my understanding is that functionally what we're dealing with is massive spreadsheets of weighted variables that you're running inputs through and then getting outputs. And so they're basically these enormous mathematical black boxes.
Yep.
Okay. So then you get these claims about, analysis of things like Lambda last summer, Google's Lambda last summer, when you had the crazy thing about Lemony.
Alive.
Yes, it's alive. Okay. Now they're like, look, it's not alive. What it's doing is character prediction. It's statistical character prediction through here. Here's what I want to fire back with. Everything that I hear about these large neural networks are the exact same arguments that I hear from people like Sam Harris about human brain and generally like low grade consciousness biology people about, okay, so that really like discomforts me about all these explanations about LLMs as, oh, look, they're just enormous databases of mathematical relationships that we don't understand. I'm like, yeah, but everyone's saying that human minds are just gigantic vats of neural impulse relationships that we don't understand. So
right, but that's because they're back mapping everything.
Right.
This is important, right?
So
what they're doing is they're saying we can use modern neural net technology to understand the brain. Now, there's two fundamental problems with that. One is modern neural net technology is based on a model of the brain. Okay, so it doesn't make any sense to then use it to remodel the thing that it's modeled from. But more importantly, the thing that people don't realize, I have the code on this computer right here from NASA in the 1980s. Fundamentally, except for Geoffrey Hinton, University of Toronto, right, in the 90s, coming up with deep neural nets, and more importantly, the Bayesian energy calculations instead of sigmoid and ReLU and all this other garbage that they use. The technology is no different, and it's based on the neural network model from the 1970s. And we know, past that point in the 80s and 90s, we know that model is so oversimplified as to be completely unhelpful and wrong. And so you're using an unhelpful and wrong analog of something, in other words, a bad copy, and saying now we can understand the original from the bad copy. That is so ridiculous. It's not worth thinking about.
Mark, that's great, and I love. What was that term again? It's back what?
Back
Analysis. Back propagation. Yes, it's.
Yeah.
Are you talking about something different?
No, you're using it backwards, right? You're using the thing you modeled to understand the thing you modeled. It's like what?
Yeah.
Right.
Wait, what?
Okay, so Mark, to catch you up on that hideous strength, the very bare bones plot is there's this sort of neo-utopian scientific government organization called the NICE, the NICE, that's basically just a bunch of demon worshipping fascists, and they cut off this guy's head. They get a convicted criminal's head, and they like animate it, and then they pull its skull off and like use all these drugs on it to make the brain huge. Well, joke's on them, because basically all they've done is like summoned a demon. And so now there's all these demons talking to them through this hyper intelligent scientific head, through this this hypertrophic brain. Anyway, you could probably get where I'm going with this, where it's like, okay, so we've got this bad analogy of the human brain that probably shouldn't work. And then it doesn't work at really small scales, because I know that the fundamental insight of neural networks is just make them really stinking huge, right? The main thing that happened is we just threw compute at it, like to the point where they're like, if we keep doing this, we're going to be like burning through small countries' GDPs just to train these things. I get that it's mostly about size. And so this is why I think that a conversation between Pageau and Vervaeke about AI is going to fundamentally break down, because listening to Pageau, as far as I can tell, he's pretty firmly in the like C.S. Lewis head camp. He's like, yeah, we're pretty much summoning demons. We're creating this massively complex thing that we don't understand, and we're saying, all right, intelligence, come out of this somehow. And I'm like, look, I can look around the world and I can see intelligence in animals and I can see intelligence in people, and I know where that comes from. That comes from other animals and other people. I'm like, you have something up here that moves it into something else. I'm like, okay, great. So now we've got this sterile mathematical network that starts exhibiting incredibly complex emergent behaviors. I'm like, what is going on here?
Right.
Anyway,
but that's the problem with Vervaeke. He stated this early on 2 years ago. He said, if you take an AI and you put it in conversation with itself, it immediately goes insane. That's still true, by the way. Like you personally, physically, right now can do this experiment. And now all of a sudden, in his new AI thing, he's like, no, there's emergence here, and because he's an emergence is good person. And the thing actually that I figured out recently as in today, is that there's being is good, there's emergence is good, and there's rationality is good, or order is good. So as long as it's ordered, it's okay. And it's like, well, what? And these are the three axiomatic assumptions I see everywhere. And of course, the Christians are saying being is good. Go figure, right? And then the scientists are typically saying emergence is good, and then the philosophers are typically saying order is good.
Well, to keep on this point about the trilogy, Ted, the evidence that we are already conjuring a sort of spirit, or it's emerging or it's emanating or whatever, the evidence for that is because so many smart people like John Vervaeke have been hoodwinked to totally change their perspective on AI because of this thing. The fundamental nature of this has not changed. It's the same reason my older professors, the professors that have been there for 30 years, they complain about neural networks and AI because it's a black box. Because everything that they worked with before this sort of thing, you could lay it out all explicitly. You could follow the math exactly. You couldn't bullshit somebody on this stuff. The dark wizardry that comes into play here is that you can't see into this thing. And one of the fields that they're trying to work on right now is called explainable AI, which basically means we're going to try and see into this black box and figure out what's going on. But you think you're going to do that with ChatGPT when it's got hundreds of billions of parameters, and you're going to make all of these and they're all connected to each other? I mean, do you know how many, like a ridiculous...
Especially if you get an efficient analog computer in there.
Right.
Which would use a ton less electricity.
Yeah. Right. But this is like there's still a lot of the point in, like, if you're trying to do object detection or something, why would you use this fancy computer vision thing that you can't really see into, and it looks, it's got these really impressive results, but you know, I can just use this thing called a Kalman filter, and I can analyze it from start to finish, input, output, do all the equations, and get it done. Like I worked on a project in school relating to this, where they're trying to use a GAN to basically generate synthetic. So they start with MR images, and they train it on a data set of MR and CT images, and they're trying to generate synthetic CT images from ground truth real MR images. And the idea is, if we get this to work, we don't have to waste time or money on CT scans again, right? That's the pull of it. But the state of the art models can, we have all these sort of, we call them, you know, image quality metrics in image processing. Basically, you know, we run it through this mathematical formula. How well does it, you know, go out on the other side? You can have these synthetic images that come out perfectly, like they have, you know, the exact same score as a real ground truth images, but you put them in front of a radiologist and they're like, that doesn't look real. That doesn't look right. And that's what the neural networks are still falling prey to, you know? Like you watch this what was it? This Joe Rogan AI experience where, you know, it's AI Joe talking to AI Sam Altman or whatever. It's the same thing. It's off. And we can tell because these AI don't have intuition. You can't program intuition.
That's the unman from Paralandra.
Yes,
that's the unman from Paralandra, right?
Because
he's almost perfect at mimicking those human movements, but every once in a while, Ransom sees something in him, and he's like, "Oh, that's not a human being," and his hair stands up on the back of his head. He's like, "That's not good. That's not a human being right there."
Yes,
and the whole thing of his intelligence in the conversation with the Green Lady and Ransom as being this tool, and the moment that they're out of a situation in which he's in this sort of dialogue directed towards a particular telos, i.e. that of corrupting an entire newly created world, then he just reverts to saying Ransom's name over and over and over. I'm like, if that doesn't sound like two chatbots talking to each other, I don't know what does.
Right.
It's like, and so it's like that, or like just destroying stuff because destroying stuff. And there's this sense in which like intelligence, when you're interfacing with another intelligent being, is there, but the moment that that's over, the unmanned right father, he's just like, it just falls to pieces. And it's because this is sort of the thing. It's like if they were ordered towards reason, then the game would be up, right? It's like, because we all know where not rationality, but reason gets you. And it's like, of course they're not. Of course they're not. So
yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, AI is a mirror. And then the irony is all of these, literally all of them are like, you know what the problem is? We keep personifying stuff. And that's a big problem, right? And then what do? They personify the things they're creating every single time because it's a mirror. And they really don't understand that simple principle. And they keep holding it up as though it's not. And the thing that we sense that makes it creepy is quality. And because you can't program quality. It's a quantity-based system. And the fact that it's effectively what AI ultimately boils down to in the math is an open algorithm that is open to numerous possibilities. And the problem with it is that it's open to too many possibilities. And so there's a famous white paper, I've talked about it before, about you can put a sticker on a stop sign and from 6 feet away, a human won't even register the sticker. But if you put that sticker on that stop sign, the car will blow the stop sign every time because the stop sign is now invisible. And nobody knows why that is. I mean, they know technically why it is, right? But the people who wrote the paper basically pointed out it's not quite infinite, the number of combinations that cause that problem, as in the problem of humans won't notice it, but computers will, is not infinite, but it's real close. In other words, you cannot fix that at all, ever. With current technology, we could fix it with some other technology. In fact, I know how to fix it, but no one's going to listen, so it doesn't matter. But they can't fix it using the current AI stuff because of the way they do. Landscape-based image recognition is actually fundamentally backwards because they're looking for objects inside the landscape instead of using an emanation approach where you're narrowing things down from the landscape to the objects. Because then you could ignore things within the stop sign.
And it goes beyond that too, because it doesn't just apply to the the physical real world domain, like stickers on a stop sign. What
Right.
a leading edge of research right now is called, adversarial attacks on AI systems. And what that means is, like, you can sprinkle in a little bit of very low level noise into an image in the same way. So as a human eye, it doesn't look any different, but the AI system will just totally misclassify. It'll turn a panda into a Pepsi can or something like that. And
Right.
that is something that you can scale up. It is so easy to attack and dismantle these systems, which means that they're not resilient like humans are. We are resilient. We're the most resilient, creatures on the planet, right? We
Yeah,
can.
they're
No,
fragile.
water bears are. Water bears are. Sorry, they put those on the exterior of the International Space Station and they laid eggs. I mean, come
Yeah.
Yeah,
on.
but
Yeah,
they're
They're
not-
the most resilient
not gonna
species
live-
on planet and off planet.
they're not getting into the kingdom of heaven, Father Eric. So they're not. Sorry.
All right. I wanted to bring up water bears. They're cool.
Yeah.
Christianity for
Mark,
the win.
all of this is going to change once we start putting these AIs into biomechanical bodies.
That was his other argument. It's weird to hear a discussion where he invokes Wittgenstein. I think it's Wittgenstein with the lion. Even if a lion could talk, we wouldn't understand it. And then later on says, but we're going to make AI, into a tiger. And then and I was like, you just said Wittgenstein said we can't do that, and now you're saying we're going to do that. And the whole time I've got this stupid spell check that changed on my phone. And what did spell check change into? It changed to an AI spell check. AI spell check is terrible. The mathematical spell check that's something like 200 lines. John, you might actually know this. I can't remember the guy who wrote the original spell check. That's based on the keyboard and whether or not you've made a typing error is way more accurate than all of the AI spell checks. Actually, and it's all math. It's much more accurate.
Well, and it's weird because this is Vervaeke. This is the same guy who spent so much time talking about zombies as the model for the current meaning crisis that we're in. And now it's like, well, let's just make some more zombies by programming biomechanical, things with AI. Okay.
But I think that there is some deep, it's hitting some really deep desire that people have. And I remember years back being given the distinction between begetting and making, right? So God makes us, we are begotten of other people, right? So the Son is begotten of the Father. We are made by God. My children are begotten of me. And like, we want to make people.
Yep.
Like, we want to make persons. And I think that that's part of why we look at that and we're like, oh, it's a person. There's intelligence there. Because it's not, because you get all the benefit of this like relationship that you might have with another person, but you can own it. Because when you make something, you can own it. When you beget something, you don't own it. And I think that I don't know, like it's weird. I don't think it's just this anthropomorphization. There's this desire to be like, we have done this.
Do it
Yeah.
the old-fashioned way. I'll get you married.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what Vervaeke started with. Like the framing of his AI talk from the beginning is all about, we need to
Parent-child.
be good parents to the children.
Yes.
And at the same time, he's saying we can't do that, but they're going to become enlightened. And then if they become enlightened, they're either going to become enlightened and leave, like the movie Her, which is a great movie, by the way, or they're going to become enlightened and make us enlightened. And so what is he talking about? He's fundamentally talking about religion and God. This is what's the deep desire, Ted? What's the perennial pattern? The perennial pattern is called religion. The post 1530 definition, by the way, because anybody before 1530 didn't even have this conception in their head because they weren't retarded enough to come up with this. It was very easy for them. Everybody before 1530 actually knew how the world worked and didn't need some like thing that you could separate from philosophy to get some pure rational world where nobody needed that. But now that we've cleaved those two in half, we need it back. And which is funny because John says that in the talk. Religion is the way we relate to a hierarchy we're not at the top of. Really, John, very insightful. Right? I mean, this is the problem with that talk. He drops these insightful bombs and everybody goes, wow, that's so insightful. It's like, yeah, but he didn't resolve it for you. and it's totally out of context of what he's saying. But you're
So-
right. It's brilliant. Sure, I'll grant him that. It's brilliant.
That's a great point, Mark. I mean, one of the ironies is that for most of history, Father Eric would have been considered a secular, right? Father Eric is a secular. He's a secular priest, as opposed to a religious priest who's gone and lived in a religious community. Religion, religious people were people in a monastery. Secular
Right.
people, including the priests and the bishops and the laity, that was all secular life, not religious life. And it's like, right. So exactly that. And it's like, and so this is, again, why I think that, I mean, maybe it'd be interesting to hear Vervaeke and Peugeot talk about this, but on the other hand, like, in one sense, like right now, AI, you say AI is the mirror. I'm not exactly sure how far I'm willing to go in terms of AI actually being a mirror to us and how much it actually has some ontology. I think I'm going to lean way more on the side of there's some real ontology there. I'm not going to fight that with you guys. But in terms of the way that we look at it is absolutely a mirror. I mean, I think it's incredibly revealing when we look at that and we're like, oh, here's the thing. You know, this is how we think about it. It becomes, right, because for Vervaeke, all of a sudden it becomes this tool for enlightenment, right? And that totally wild conversation that Peugeot had with, what was his name? The psychedelics, like live your best life guy. Does anyone else remember that? That turned it where the guy's like, what was his name?
Yeah, what is his name? I can't.
But he was
remember.
like, man, if we like created AGI and it like became the Godhead, wouldn't that be great? And Peugeot was like, no, it wouldn't. Yes. Yeah.
No, it's not even that AI is a mirror. It's a broken mirror. Sally Joe actually has a great little cartoon she drew of the broken mirror of AI on my server, which is fantastic. And that is the problem. It's like a broken funhouse mirror. It's got a crack in it and it's distorted. And we're looking at it, and we're seeing what we project. But it is you're right, Ted. It's that drive to get to be gods, right? To create. Here it is. Excellent. Yeah. That's AI right there. That's actually what AI is. Right.
I also love that it's him. It's not the friends. It's him, his reflection that he's seeing.
Exactly. Yes. He's only seeing his own reflection, and it's got a crack in it. Although that's a little harder to discern. But the mirror is actually cracked.
And the crazy thing isn't just about the what we think of it themselves. It's what these AGI people who are advocating this describe how we think about it, because they'll just describe it. Oh, well, when we see certain patterns or view, this AI, and we anthropomorphize it. Oh, that's some sort of, deviation from reality, because it's like, we're seeing patterns in something that's not there. And these people, they don't understand human psychology. They don't understand spiritual reality, which again, Vervaeke needs theology and some sort of theology of spiritual beings. I don't even know what else to say, because we have already developed a God here, a lowercase g God. We have already instantiated an Elohim of some kind.
If what you want from this thing is to be the thing that is enlightened, how is that different from stating that it's capital G God? Because in the Christian tradition, from my understanding, and I'm no expert here, but pretty sure my understanding is pretty close on this. All enlightenment comes from God, doesn't it? Like, am I wrong about it? It's like,
to be mediated by an angel.
Sounds good to me.
Thanks. Detail wrong. But didn't angels come from God too?
Yeah. I was being dumb. I was being dumb, Mark.
I know. No, it was perfect.
My stream, I can be dumb whenever I want to.
No, it was perfect, right? Because it's like, technically, because it is exactly the move the scientists would make. Technically, the angels aren't God. It's like, but they came from God, you muppet. So it's all flowing down here. Like, the fact that it's not the top doesn't mean it didn't flow downhill. That's the trick they play. Well, that's not the top. It's like, what are you, two? Like, come on. Like,
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Aristotle's four causes. We could, it's like, it's caused by X. I'm like, great. Which of the four was that? We still have three more. Which, by the way, if you ever end up having young children, is a great trick, because they will always just ask you why, and you just dodge between causes. Why is it raining? well, here's the physical cause. Why is it raining? Well, because God ordained it so that plants will live. Why is it raining? Because of these atmospheric, and it's like, because there was a cold front. It's like, they're all wise. It's great. But if you're just like, there it is, we answered it. No.
Well, that's actually really insightful, Ted, right? Because that's what we need to do. We need to stop giving single answers for things, because nothing has a
Absolutely.
single cause.
No. I mean, but Mark, I remember this was like 3 years ago when I first like actually sat down and read this. First read like some real Aristotelian and Thomistic science, and it was like, what is this? Like, I couldn't even understand what the guy was talking about. He's like, there's four principal causes to things. I was like, I have no idea what that means. What do you mean there's more than one cause to things? And it took me like, I don't know, 6 months, a year to finally start thinking, oh, that's a material cause is different from a formal cause, which is different from a final cause, which is different from an efficient cause. It's like, all right, I'm starting to realize that basically every answer that was given to me was the efficient cause, which is interesting. It's like, why did this happen? It's like, here's the efficient cause. I'm like, no, I wanted some other answers than that one.
Or a combination of formal and efficient. That's the most common scientific explanation, is a formal plus an efficient cause combined in some weird Neoplatonic hybrid that is invalid.
Which is why you end up with these like weird. Sorry about the chocolate on my fingers. My wife just gave me some chocolate chips cookies. They're fresh out of the oven, which is great. Glory be to God. But no, we stick to like that, and then we think, well, why are all these whys so unsatisfying? It's like science and religion have like all this weird stuff, and I'm like, no, man, we're just not like, people figured this out a long time ago in terms of understanding there's like a lot of different ways to ask why. At any rate, I agree with you. I mean, like, we could all just sit down and think about that for a little while, and we'd be doing a lot better.
And be happy with the struggle of not knowing. Because it's back to the struggle that John mentioned earlier, right? Like, the struggle is important. You should be in the struggle. That's the tension that everybody keeps talking about with the pony processing, which is not, it's cooperative processing. That's the struggle.
Yeah.
It's just interesting, man. I mean, thinking about those causes again, I just think about when I finally hit that out of grad school, after quitting grad school, to be more blunt. I felt like I've been hoodwinked my entire education. It's not like all the data that I had been given wasn't great and I couldn't use it, but it's just like, how, and Father Eric, I think I've gone on this rant before in your live stream about this stuff, but it's just like, how did I, any rate, you just teach your kids, or you teach the people around you, and you give them a better shot at it than you did when you're just toddling along with all these atoms knocking together, and you're like, I guess God's somewhere in the mix or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and that's not just your struggle. So there was a great talk that that John Vervaeke did with Wolfgang Smith on the Meaning Code channel.
Yes, that was a great talk.
The summary for me, that was actually it was back in September, I believe, because I was listening to it on the way back from Thunder Bay. The summary to me was, two guys get into science looking for the answer to life, the universe, and everything, right? Figure out it's not there, right? Pretty quickly, because they're smart guys. Like, they're not morons, right? These are way above average guys.
What did Wolfgang graduate with? 2 or 3 majors from Cornell at 16 or something. I mean, it's like you hear that guy's resume and you're
Wolfgang.
Like, who are you?
Wolfgang's not human, clearly. Like, yeah. But then they go into philosophy, figure out the answer's not there either. And then one of them, the one that's not human, actually is a Catholic now. I'll leave you to guess which one that is. Right, but it's this quest for this answer that's not there in science, and then this quest for this answer that's not there in philosophy, and then this ultimate, like, how do we resolve this? Oh, and I like what Taleb says. If you've not seen Taleb's just great. Gotta read all his books. You just gotta, right? Because he says, I want to live comfortably in a world I do not understand. It's like, yes, that's exactly what you want to do. It's very religious, even though
that's Chesterton. That's Chesterton's description of what he wanted of the universe. He wanted someplace where he could have an adventure at the same time as feeling at home. Like, that's the same thing. He's like, I want to be the guy who thinks he's, exploring some great South Sea island that no man has ever been on before, only to realize that I'm like showing up at Brighton. He's like, I want all the fun and bravery and conquest, and yet to be at home, truly at home here, that's right. finding a spiritual home. They're going to do that thing in California in a couple of weeks. There's a reason that it's
They're
like,
not marketing this properly, right?
yeah,
Spiritual home. I'm going to make them all Catholic.
yes, Father Egg, let's go.
We've already got the spiritual. Yeah, it's like finding a spiritual home. Like there aren't
We're
any
going to go
available.
to St. Margaret Mary's for Sunday Mass. Boom.
No, it's
for you.
you know what it is? It's
Oh,
the
yeah.
spiritual home building crisis has taken over, and they just haven't built enough spiritual homes for people. So we've got to build a few more. Gnosticism confirmed.
It's the spiritual housing crisis.
Yes, thank you, Andrew.
Caused
That's
by the
exactly-
spiritual Fed raising the spiritual interest rates too high.
Yes, yes. What we need is a nice Gnostic apartment building to house everybody spiritually.
Unfortunately, I don't think that's what I'm trained to do in my discipline.
Andrew, I'm guessing that the Gnostic apartment buildings look like one of those like Soviet era Soviet Union blocks where it's just like
I bet.
concrete. Also, as an aside, if any of you guys have ever not read "Live Not by Lies" by
Roger.
Rod Dreher, there's some fascinating stories out of the Soviet Union, and one of my favorites is there was a group of people, and I don't remember if they were Orthodox or Catholic, but they got permission to fix a toilet in one of those Soviet bloc apartment buildings, tore out a 4-story hole inside of it, and built a church inside a Soviet apartment building. Like, it's so cool. They're like, for years they were operating on they needed to fix a toilet permit, and they're like, yeah, we're still doing construction in here.
The
Anyway,
whole thing was so corrupt that worked.
yeah,
but nobody
exactly.
noticed.
But
Fixing a
Father,
toilet.
that's my picture for you at this conference. Is here's the Gnostic apartment building, and you're like, we're gonna go fix the toilet in there.
Yeah.
I love it. It's a great image.
That's
Oh boy. Mark, I want your predictions. What happens when we get a semi-functional biomechanical suit and we put an AI inside of it?
It depends on the biomechanics almost entirely, actually. That's the problem, is that like this is one of those little things. There's 2 things in AI that matter more than anything else. Like, forget about the algorithm and the setup of the neural net and all that. It's actually the least important part. The 2 things that matter most are number of inputs and type of inputs. It's like that determines 80 or 90% of it. And so you kind of have to know, because a biomechanical suit, if you do it right, you have to have special different types of inputs. And actually, if it's any biology and you don't make it an analog input, which they're right on the edge of being able to do things like that, but it's all research, small scale stuff. You would have to account for so many things. And so I don't think it would work, because we've already many times over done the physical constraints to digital conversion AI stuff, and it's not impressive. Like, we've had that for decades, and it just doesn't work very well, right? So you can make little robots. So the big thing is little robots that have like tensor AIs and stuff that are you train them on a computer in a physics engine, and then you put the trained model into a real world tiny robot, and it can kind of do stuff. The analog robots of the same size without any training actually do better. So it's like, because it's analog, and analog computers have all kinds of advantages, because basically, effectively, if you boil it down to math, which is inappropriate, but the closest we can do, the range of the math is much greater in an analog system. It's like 7 orders of magnitude bigger. So like, the things it can do is
Insofar as we
better.
can measure it.
yeah.
Right.
Well,
The
other thing about it is the scaling problem that we were talking about earlier, because you're talking about some sort of biomechanical system. Okay, well, what level are we analyzing that on? You know, we could have an elbow joint. Okay, we have an elbow joint. Okay, we can have finger joints. Well, how precise are we going to get with these finger joints? Oh, we could go all the way down to individual cells. How complex is this thing going to be? And even if you were to get to that some insane level of complexity, what you're going to run into is the overfitting problem. You're going to
Right.
this thing is going to learn certain patterns that are specific only to the data that you trained on. And then once you put it in the real world, it's just going to fall on its face because it's
Yeah,
stuff
fall
that it's
over.
never seen before. And because you've given it too many parameters and specified it too
Right.
much, then
Right.
that's why there's this tension between making it more general and making it more specific and going on a smaller, a smaller level down the hierarchy, right? And this is a perennial problem they have not figured out that applies for any sort of AI system. So that's my
It applies for
prediction.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
The perennial pattern, the fundamental problem where they say, well, this has so many parameters. The more parameters you have, the more overfit you are. It's not exact, but it's real close. It's real close, and you're too few, and it's going to be underfit, too many, and it's going to be overfit. And the big lie they're telling about AI that they don't mention is that the tuning they do at that level, which actually is hard, so not anybody can do it, but the parameter tuning is a huge thing. It's enormous. So you can go on the web right now and download any number of models to do character recognition or facial recognition or any of that stuff. And I guarantee you, unless you know something about data sets and what kind of data you're feeding it, the odds that you'll get a parameter set that will ever work are almost zero. It is very, very hard to manufacture the right initial conditions because that matters a lot, which is ironic because John mentioned that in the talk. And I'm like, well, then it's not only is it not general AI, but it's not general within a silo. So where are we with artificial general intelligence if you can't take AlphaGo and give it a 6-stone advantage and it still win? It can't even do that. It's not even general within the domain it's good at. That means basically that these parameters and this overfitting is a big problem because it's not just overfitting to the data. In the case of AlphaGo, it's overfitting to the starting condition. And we haven't even talked about that problem in AI.
Yes. Yeah. And this is what you see in reinforcement learning as well, which is its whole bear in itself. But that's like you want to see an example of AI failing to generalize in any situation. That sort of thing is where it's at. And what I think you're going to see is the use cases for these AI models are going to be for very specific tasks, very narrow range tasks. Like you could have a Chat GPT that it has access to an entire hospital system's medical records, and it's going to give you a diagnosis or a suggested diagnosis or whatever,
or a virtual representative that the patient can download on their phone.
That's just delightful, isn't it? Yeah. But
Right.
yeah, that as long as you have a human doctor that is the one who is interpreting and using that tool properly, and as long as you have a human X doing all the interpretations for whatever these very narrow range systems are putting out, I think they have a huge amount of potential in those domains. It's just you get the people that come on, like Lex Fridman's podcast, and he'll ask him questions like, do you think ChatGPT is conscious? It's like, Lex, you're smarter than this. Don't do this, man. Their consciousness is like the what would you say? It's like the ultimate in what it means to be generalizable, and AI is it's not there, and maybe it will never be.
John,
they can't even define consciousness. That was Thunder Bay. They couldn't define it.
Well, I mean, that's like Yuval Harari's book, I think it's Homo Deus, it might be Sapiens, where he's like, I'm going to give you a rundown on everything that we figured out about human consciousness in the scientific field in the last 50 years. Nothing. And he's like moving along, and you're like, okay, that's something. But at any rate, I was going to say, as much as I appreciate y'all's pessimism about the capacity of AI to develop out of these highly specific confines and situations, I would say I have an almost unfailing faith in, I guess, what Paul Kingsnorth would call the machine, to look at that and say, all right, well, that's where humans are living now. Because there's two ways to fix that. One is to figure out systems maybe that can exist in all of these environments. And the other one is to say, hey, we solved it right here and here. We're going to make you live there. And that, that's a sticky one right there. When you think of, say, the degree of, honestly, even this, again, break the fourth wall, do a grim grizz. It's like, we're willing to accept a very low resolution form of communication with each other in order to get these benefits of the fact that I can, talk with these people that I would never sit down in the same room with or even find, and it's like, to what degree are we societally going to be willing to make those exchanges to say, hey, look, I get that this AI can only function in very certain circumstances, but if I live in just those very particular circumstances, say that initial setting for the Go board, conversational equivalent, then I can feel like I have a friend. And it's like,
we already do that. Yeah, we already do that now. And this is like the big struggle. What are you going to be submitted to? Are you going to be submitted to the thing that gives you enlightenment that's called AI? Are you going to be submitted to the thing that gives you enlightenment that's called God? Are you going to be submitted to the thing that gives you enlightenment that's called Gaia? Or I can go on and on and on. We've got all these Gnostic apartment building cults that we could, and people do pick one. It's not that they're not submitted. It's not that they're not, able to operate in the hierarchy. They know, at least unconsciously, they need the hierarchy, and they slide into one, right? Because if you believe you do not have a religion, one will be provided to you without your knowledge or consent. And that's effectively what's happening. So what you see in the religious wars of AI is people who go, yay, it's going to give us enlightenment. People go, no, I won't be under the thumb of the thing that gives us enlightenment. It's the same battle all over again. It's just a different target at the top of the hierarchy.
Well, there's just a few days ago, there's this really great clip that from David Bentley Hart, when he talks about AI. It's like a clip from his book, The Experience of God. And he talks about all of this AI stuff. And I think it's real. Like one of the things he brings up is how this, like we were saying earlier, how AI does not, it has no essence in itself, right? And so what Hart says that means, it's like the Deep Blue computer did not beat Garry Kasparov. Garry Kasparov and every single other human expert who's ever played a chess game beat Garry Kasparov, because that's what that thing was trained on. That's what it was trained to do. And the point is, there is nothing emergent in that. It's just an aggregation. It's not an emergent.
It's like intellectual necromancy or something. You're like raising to some sort of galvanic, unnatural life the dead thoughts of everyone else.
Yeah.
Yes.
Boy,
yeah, that's a great. And I mean, there are benefits to aggregation in one place, in one system, in very specific use cases. But to say, it was a Deep Mind, Deep Blue, whatever it was, beat Garry Kasparov? No, it didn't. Everybody in the world beat Garry Kasparov, including himself. This is one of the points that Hart.
Yeah, but Neoplatonism, and therefore I can just make something called Deep Blue and say that is the oneness that beat Garry Kasparov. How dare you, John? I'm a Neoplatonic. I called it. I named it. It's been instantiated in being. It's Wingardium Leviosa or Leviosa. Sorry, Leviosa.
Yeah, that's quite a modern, subjective, postmodern-ish Platonism. I point at the one and I say it's the one because I want it to be the one.
Well, that Neoplatonism doesn't give you a resolution to that at all, even according to Vervaeke. That's why you need the religion that's not a religion. It's like, seems like a lot of work for something we already got out of Christianity. But hey, I mean, I guess if you want to try to reproduce 2,000 plus years of work by yourself in your own lifetime, I guess you can try. But I got things to do. I gotta go.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And I
Well,
actually do. Yeah.
I've got one last thing. I think no discussion of AI this week should go without. We'll just go with a flat presentation view here. So, feast your eyes, everybody, on the AI generated pizza commercial.
This is pizza?
Oh.
Vegetable.
things.
Secret things.
Gnosticism, secret things.
Oh gosh. The horror.
It's like family, but with more cheese. Sam, I'm
Pepper-
about to wrap this up, but hello.
Pepperoni hug spot.
Hey, Sam.
Pepperoni,
I'm
pepperoni
never
hug
going
spot.
there.
What's like family but with old cheese?
Pepperoni hug
It's
spot.
a pizza place that disfigures anybody who eats the pizza.
That was great.
Oh,
Wow.
alrighty. So,
Someone's
night,
children
everybody.
are more unhappy than mine. All right. Good night. This was really fun. I felt like I really got a lot out of it. Some good breakthroughs and other moments. I look forward to the next one.
okay,
All
very
right.
good. Take
Glad
care.
to hear that.